It's finally Friday. It's Friday, Friday.
Thank God it's
Welcome back to the Friday Show, presented by the Match Series. We'll tell you where that's going this weekend. I'm Scott Jagow, along with Ray Paulick. Glad to have you join us. Ray, it's the middle of the year. We kind of were talking about maybe what are some of the trends we've seen so far in 2018. One of them came up at the Belmont Stakes after the race when owners were complaining and horse players were complaining about the tactics used by certain horses who were stablemates or owned by similar interests in the partnership, and how it kind of left a sour taste in some people's mouths. So, but it used to be that entries were coupled. How did we get to this point where they're not anymore?
Yeah, when I first got involved in racing, there were, not every state had exactly the same rules, but generally speaking, there were a lot of states that had trainer couplings, which meant if you had two horses in a race, even if they had different owners, they were coupled for wagering purposes. And nearly every state had ownership couplings or entries, where if you had a piece of two different horses, they ran as the same betting interest. Over the years, horse players complained about that. They kind of liked the idea of separating the horses because they felt like if one horse in the entry would have been 7-5 on his own and the other horse was 5-1 and they liked the 5-1, they were going to get 7-5 or less, even if the 5-1 shot had won and they didn't like it. It's also something that has become decoupling, has become popular with racing offices to fill races. There's a shortage of owners, which leads to a shortage of horses. And the Breeders' Cup decided some years ago to push for no coupled entries in their races. So all of that combined has led to almost everywhere you very rarely see coupled entries anymore. And the funny thing is the pendulum has kind of swung in the other direction, and now the horse players, among others, are saying, hey, this isn't right, because there's three horses here that have same ownership interests, and but they're different betting interests, and I don't know what kind of tactics they're going to employ with these three different horses and whether or not those tactics are in the best interest of that horse winning.
There's another trend here that kind of is woven through this, and Bill Finley of the Thoroughbred Daily News touched on this in a two-part series recently, which was really good, and looked at what so-called super trainers, this referring to the big guys in the business who have the huge stables, the Todd Pletchers and the Mark Cassies and the Bob Bafferts and the Chad Browns, and what this is doing to the sport, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, and how racetracks feel about it and how smaller trainers feel about it. I think it's pretty obvious smaller trainers aren't in love with the idea of these guys because, as the type of stables they have, because it's so hard to compete against them. And the racetracks don't love it because they have fewer entries for races, especially the big races. Now, when you go down to the cheaper level, Tim Ritvo with the Stronach Group was saying, our best handle is on the cheaper races where you don't have the super trainers in. You've got 9, 10, 11, 12 of the smaller trainers competing against each other, and it's very competitive, and that makes a good betting race.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you change this setup that we now have with so many of the best horses being in one barn, and it, like you said, it really does hurt racing offices' attempts to fill races. If one trainer has 15 or 22-year-olds that have broken their maiden, and they're going to try to run an allowance race, 13 of those horses aren't going to run, and if they were with different trainers, there's a good chance they would be. So, the idea of the wealth, accumulating with one stable or a few different stables, it's really not unlike professional sports. You look at the Major League Baseball or football or NBA, they have things like salary caps. A sport that hasn't done anything about it, I think, and it's probably hurt them, is auto racing. The IndyCar races are really kind of boring when you see Roger Penske or one of the other major team owners just dominating the sport with one of their several drivers.
Yeah, but even those sports that have salary caps and luxury taxes, you still have teams that dominate. You've got the Golden State Warriors. They have a luxury tax in the NBA. You have the New England Patriots. They have a salary cap in the NFL. Those teams, honestly, have just figured out a way to be smarter about the money they do have and the way they spend it. So that's some of this is these guys we've been talking about are being smarter, being so organized. They built their stables from smaller outfits where they had like 10 horses to start out with, and now they have 200. So they work their way up. They put in the sweat. They work 24/7. They are dedicated. So that's all a positive thing. It's a good example to show people that hard work does produce results. And Todd Pletcher said that about results. He said this is a results-oriented business. When you're successful and win races, people want to give you horses. So then you end up getting the best horses, and that's kind of the story with all of these guys. However, when you look at the owners, Pletcher also said, we do what American owners want. And he was referring to looking at juveniles and 3-year-olds who might be pointing for the Kentucky Derby. And I think that is part of this issue, because Martin Panza in this story said it's kind of dumb of owners to give all their horses to these guys when you just pointed out they have all these horses that won't run. They'll only run 3 or 4 times a year. They could be running under a smaller trainer 8 or 9 times a year.
Yeah, as I said, it's a free market. I'm not sure how you can change the system we currently have, but it's got to be really tough for the guys that are being squeezed. Chuck Simon was quoted in the Bill Finley article, or in a video that accompanied the article, just saying that when all these horses end up in one barn, there's a lot of guys that aren't that are being squeezed out of the business or have a handful of horses. Having said that, these so-called super trainers, as you said, are so well organized. They're also really good at communicating. And there's a lot of old school trainers that live by, feed them, treat them like mushrooms. You keep them in the dark and feed them a bunch of manure. And it's important in this day and age for trainers to not only know horses and know how to win races, but also know how to communicate.
I think it's also some of these owners say, yeah, we want to support and racetracks. We want to support the smaller guys, and that's great to say, but in the end, when you're giving all your horses to the bigger trainers, you're saying something else with how you're voting with your dollars. I mean, I think of Amazon, for example. People always complain about Amazon crushing the little guy and the mom and pop stores, and people are saying rah, rah, rah for the little guy. But then, you know what they do? They go and shop Amazon because it's convenient, it's easy, and they're successful. They can get whatever they want there. And so they are actually making a decision that goes against what they say they want.
That reminds me a little bit of some readers that say you need more stories that are positive and good news, and you have too many negative stories, the scandals and so on. And I go and I look at Google Analytics, and you know what? Those people are saying one thing and they're reading another thing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, speaking of solutions about this, Chad Brown did in the article say, I'd be willing to pay a higher stall fee. I'd be willing to pay sort of a luxury tax. I'm not sure where that money would go.
Right.
I don't know if it would really make a difference, but maybe there needs to be something that, because in the end, the difference is, it's not just like a business on Wall Street. It's not, because it's a sport, and it needs to be competitive. Like you said, Indy racing has kind of gotten boring. The NFL is not boring because it does have salary caps, and you have teams that go from worst to first every single year, and there's something in that people love. So maybe racing does need to look at a way to even the playing field somewhat, even though you're going to have people who are more successful than others, that work harder than others, etc. It is a sport, and as you said, people are betting on it, so they're putting their own money into this, and if they're complaining about it, maybe they won't.
Yeah, Chad Brown had another interesting comment in there, and he said that be careful what you wish for. He said, I think successful trainers are keeping more owners in the business and spending money at yearling sales, breeding more mares and buying stallion seasons and that sort of thing, versus owners that are with trainers who are not successful. They lose money and they get out of the business. So his point is the super trainers, if they're successful, are keeping owners in the business, retaining owners, which is very important for this game.
I thought it was funny that one of the trainers, I can't remember at the moment who it was, Larry Bates, I think, said, all these guys, they work really hard, they're dedicated, but now they all have white hair way too soon, and I like to go fishing. So there is an element of people who just, they're happy being in that kind of position. I'm looking at it from a macro perspective and how it affects the sport long term in terms of betting interests and so forth. Let's ask you, we have a poll on the website, paulickreport.com. Are super trainers, are these guys with the huge stables good or bad for horse racing? Let us know your thoughts. Ray, where is the match series going this weekend?
This Saturday, the match series goes to Delaware Park and to Parks in Philadelphia. Delaware Park has the Dashing Beauty. It's a filly and mare dirt sprint division race. And the two races at Parks are the Turf Amazon. That's for fillies and mares turf sprinters. And the race that I really like is the Parks Dash. It's for male turf sprinters on turf. Pure Sensation is in there for Christophe Clement. It is a terrific field, good betting race, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that race in particular.
All right, the Match Series presents the Friday show. We appreciate it. We appreciate you watching. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.